This incident happened about 3 weeks after Hurricane Irma. Back in July, my ex and I had just finalized the divorce, and I moved into a gated neighborhood where every house was rented out by the same rental company and landlords. It's a very small neighborhood with about 15 houses tops. All 15 houses are bordered by a man-made lake with the backyards facing the lake. No one really has a backyard fence. When you walk out your back door, you see the lake in front of you and your neighbor's backyard on each side of you. Everyone in the neighborhood seemed very close. Someone was always hosting a family-friendly party or BBQ or having people over to watch sports. I was, and then still am, depressed about my divorce, so I never partook in these social gatherings. The only person I got to know was my next-door neighbor Steve, an active Navy soldier with a huge love for guns. Steve is the true hero in this nightmare. My daughter Alice is 4 years old and I get her every weekend. Alice's bedroom window faces the backyard towards the lake. I spoiled that girl to death. She truly is my everything, and I count down the days to the weekend every week just to be with her. That's why I was upset when Irma came and I had to go almost 3 weekends without seeing her. The weekend before the storm, she was with her mom. Then obviously the weekend of the storm, she was with her mom. Then on top of that, the weekend after, she had to be with her mom because my power was still out. No AC in Florida. It was miserable. The humidity was so bad that week that I slept in my daughter's room the whole week because she had the only room with a window that faces the lake. I opened the window, exposing just the window screen so the wind from the lake could cool the room as much as possible while I slept. Eventually, the power comes back, and Alice starts visiting me again like normal. That was when the nightmare started. My daughter would explain about the singing lady and how she doesn't like her anymore. I thought maybe she was referring to one of my ex-friends or one of the teachers at her school. Maybe there was a teacher in a school that sang to the kids and that she didn't like. But that Saturday night, Alice woke up in the middle of the night screaming bloody murder. I ran into her room and turned on the light and found her hiding under her covers. I asked her what was wrong. All she could do was point to an empty corner of her room and yell, "Look, look!" There was nothing there. She was acting as if she had seen a ghost. After I calmed her down, she started to talk about the singing lady again. "Please tell the singing lady not to come back. Please, Daddy, make it go away," she would say. Obviously, she's having nightmares, right? I showed her that there was nothing in the closet and nothing under the bed, and that there was nothing to be afraid of. She calmed down and went back to sleep. I went back to my room and quickly fell back asleep as well. It couldn't have been more than 20 minutes before Alice came running into my room screaming, "She's back! She's back!" Alice absolutely refused to go back to her room, so I let her sleep with me. The next morning, Sunday morning, I took Alice out to breakfast, and we stopped by Target to pick up a baby monitor. I haven't used one since she and her mom and I were still married, but I wanted to easily be able to hear her and if and when she was having nightmares again, so I could respond quicker. After I set them up, I showed Alice how they worked to give her assurance that I could hear her and that she was safe. That night she slept soundly and didn't make a peep all night. The following weekend, Alice had to stay with her mother again because she had caught a stomach virus from one of her little friends at school. It was Saturday night, and I was sound asleep in my bed. Around 2 a.m. is when I heard it, a woman's voice humming, a soft nursery rhyme through the baby monitor. The humming, soft singing got louder and clearer as the voice got closer to the monitor. I wasn't dreaming. I could hear a woman softly singing lullabies in my daughter's bedroom. I'd never been so scared and dumbfounded in my life. I was feeling a mixture of pure terror and disbelief. Then the voice spoke out, "Alice, sweetie, are you awake?" Adrenaline shot through my veins. I jumped out of bed and locked my bedroom door. I picked up my cell and called Steve from next door. He didn't waste a second. As soon as I got off the phone with him, I heard him storm out of his back door screaming, "Don't you move!" I ran inside and found him aiming his shotgun at a woman crouched outside my daughter's window. The one I had left open after Irma never closed. Steve quickly dropped his guard when he recognized the woman. It was Jean, the neighborhood maintenance woman. Steve's wife came running out after him and confirmed it was her. Jean played dumb. She said she was not singing and didn't even know my daughter's name. She said she was near my daughter's window because she was doing her weekly patrol for gators and thought she saw one approaching our house from the lake. Full of crap. That chick was singing, and she called out my daughter by name. Yes, it's true that there have been a few gator sightings around the neighborhood, and yes, Part of Jean's job was to patrol the lake at night every now and then, but at 2 a.m., I obviously knew it was bullcrap. And even though neither Steve nor his wife called her out on it, I could tell by the look on their faces that they didn't believe her either. The next morning, I went over to Steve's house to thank him and tell him exactly what happened. He told me Jean and her husband have been known to be a little cuckoo. But this is by far the craziest thing to have happened so far. Steve helped me install metal bars in Alice's window that afternoon. I'm originally from Iowa, born and raised, but have recently moved to Orlando, Florida, with my wife. I've always vacationed in Florida, ever since I was a kid. So when I got an opportunity to relocate to Orlando for work, my wife and I were thrilled. Now that we've lived here for the past 2 years, I've started to understand why Florida gets such a bad rap for having some strange people. My job allows me to work from home on certain days, so between my wife's hectic schedule as a registered nurse and mine, one of us is usually home. On Wednesday night, I was at home working on my laptop on our patio while my wife was working a double shift until 7 a.m. We live on a quiet seat, tucked away from the main roads in the area. The houses are decently spread out, so there's about 50 to 60 feet between the properties. The overall area is fairly underdeveloped, and the majority of land behind the neighborhood houses are marshes. I'd say we have a pretty average-sized backyard, around 6,000 square feet. Behind that, there's little to no civilization for miles behind the marsh. So around 8:30 p.m., as I was sitting out on the patio, I thought I heard a male voice screaming in the distance. It definitely caught my attention, so I stopped what I was doing and tried to make sense of where it was coming from. The screaming lasted maybe 5 seconds, but completely stopped and went silent afterwards, although I couldn't be sure. It sounded like it was coming from the marsh, but who would be out there? I quickly forgot about it and finished up the rest of my work that went inside to watch TV before bed. I remember sitting there on the couch when I heard the same scream from earlier again. I muted the TV, but this time the screaming sounded to be much closer to the house. I got up to look out the back window, but it was too dark to see past my property line, so I forgot about it again and went back to the couch. 10 minutes passed and out of nowhere. Again, I heard the same scream, but each time it sounded like it was getting closer. This time I actually decided to investigate because unless the guy was screaming over a megaphone, it sounded like he was right outside my house. I flipped on the lights inside the screened-in patio and walked out to scan the backyard. As soon as I walked out, I could instantly make out a male figure standing in my backyard. I reacted by screaming at him to get away, and I threatened to call the cops. However, the figure showed no reply and just stood there completely motionless like a statue. So I did exactly what I said I'd do, and I walked back inside the house to grab my phone and call the cops. As soon as I shut the door behind me, he let out another scream at the top of his lungs, probably enough to destroy his vocal cords. Something really seemed to be wrong with him, so I started getting panicked. I told the dispatcher lady that someone needed to get over here as soon as possible, explaining that there was an unstable man screaming in my backyard. She told me to make sure that all doors and windows were locked, and instructed me to find something to defend myself with in the case of a break-in. I shut off all the lights in the kitchen, grabbed a knife from the drawer, and crouched my way to the window to see if he was still outside. Now that it was dark inside my house, I had a much better view of this man. He was only wearing his underwear and was completely covered in mud and grass. He was holding something in his hand, but I couldn't tell what it was, so I assumed it was a weapon of some sort. The dispatcher told me to lock myself in a safe room away from the windows, so I walked down the hall to my room and locked the door shut. I always thought that I'd remain calm if I were ever in a situation like this, but I was completely wrong. When you're living in the moment knowing that your life could be on the line, I think a lot of people would be surprised at how terrifying it actually is. The lady told me that the police would be there within 10 minutes to stay on the line no matter what. I did exactly that, and sat up against the corner, away from the windows while I waited for them to arrive. Suddenly, I began hearing a banging sound coming from the back of my house. My hands started sweating, and I gripped the knife even tighter in my hand as I listened in horror. It sounded like it was coming from the patio, and I froze as I realized that the banging sound was from him trying to break the door down to get inside. I told the dispatcher what was happening, and she told me to stay calm and quiet, reminding me that the police were only a few minutes away. But by the sounds of it, I didn't have a few minutes. This guy literally sounded like he was throwing his entire body against the door. Before I could even process what was happening, I heard a loud crash, followed by fast-paced footsteps, loudly stomping inside the house. I reacted out of complete instinct. I jumped out the window and began running down the street as fast as I could, telling the dispatcher that he got in the house in between breaths. I didn't stop running until I saw a police car, and I flagged him down to stop. He immediately drew his gun on me, but I told him that I was the person who called, and I showed him the call to 911. The police arrived at the house, and I was eventually taken to the police station to talk with them. They ended up kicking down my front door because as soon as they walked onto my property, they heard the same screams I was describing coming from inside my house. The man was found hiding behind my dresser in my bedroom with a machete, which meant that he kicked down my locked bedroom door. He was arrested and charged with several serious crimes like aggravated burglary, possession of a weapon during the commission of a crime, possession of methamphetamine, and attempted murder, just to name a few. He had no reason to attack me and was found to be in a full-out state of drug-induced psychosis on the night this occurred. I know very well that I easily could have been killed that night, and I'm glad I made the decision to get out when I did, because otherwise I would have been in a fight for my life. Almost 25 years ago, when I was probably 8, my family moved into this large old house that was probably built in the early 1900s. It was a 2-store Victorian-style house in Florida. It had a laundry chute that led to a large concrete basement where the washing machine and dryer were. There was this weird room in the basement that seemed out of place and disturbing. It was a room no larger than a closet with an old claw foot tub and shower head, and a way to padlock from the outside, but no way to lock it from the inside. I still think about this room and wonder why it was set up in that way. The house had a mostly good feeling to it, except for the basement. Eventually, my very superstitious stepmother became so uncomfortable going into the basement to do laundry that she made my dad convert the mudroom into a laundry room so that she wouldn't have to go downstairs anymore. My dad thought she was being ridiculous, but he did it anyway. We lived in the house for a few years, and at some point the feeling in the house started to shift. Little things started to happen. Nothing too concerning, though. My stepsister eventually started to feel really uncomfortable in her room upstairs. She said she felt like someone was watching her when she slept, and she had a hard time sleeping at night. She started sleeping more during the day on the couch in the living room or would just sleep with me in my room. Our cats would act funny. They'd puff up with pupils full and stare at seemingly nothing. Just little things that were freaky, but nothing too crazy. One day, my stepmom took me with her to pick up some lunch for everyone, and when we were driving towards the house, I could vividly see someone wearing all black like a full-on cape standing in my stepsister's window watching us. My stepmom saw it too, and she freaked out. She had my dad and stepbrother do a whole search of the house. They found nothing. They thought we were being paranoid and figured we had seen a shadow or something. Eventually, my dad and stepbrother started feeling uneasy in the house too. Sometimes you could hear what sounded like someone walking up the basement stairs, and my dad would grab a bat and be ready to confront whoever it was. This sort of thing continued for a while. I've asked my dad about it, and he says, man, that house would freak me out. I'd hear those footsteps, and I'd grab a flashlight and a bat. I'd puff up my chest, open the door, and run down those stairs swinging ready to kill whatever was there. It got to a point where everyone was on edge in the house. The final straw of us moving was when my stepbrother went to open a window in his upstairs room, and both of his arms went straight through the window. The last time I talked to him was a few years ago, but even then, he still swears someone pushed him, despite being the only person upstairs. He had to be rushed to the emergency room, where they had to remove huge shards of glass from his arms and stitched him back up. He has very gnarly scars from it. We moved from their house, and eventually the old lady that owned it sold it. I don't think you can keep tenants for very long, but that was just me speculating. Where the house sat is now a car dealership. Supposedly the house itself was moved from the property and is still somewhere in the town I live in. I've never seen it though, and have no interest in finding it.